Okay, on to part 9, opening protection. This is quite easily the most complicated section because there's many types of opening protection, and there's actually two portions of this, the opening protection chart and the opening protection question. So we're going to get right into it and move forward. Before we get going, let's talk about one thing here, and I love showing this chart from the ARA and the study for losses on single family by opening protection. And one thing you'll notice is those items that have engineered shutters, meaning protection, they seem to have damage more often than other sections. But what you're not realizing is, unfortunately, those are areas that are more likely to have damage to begin with. So, this is a great thing about charts is, you can make them, say a lot of things, and you have to understand what they were doing. So, importantly enough here is, despite the fact that it might show you have more damage earlier, less wind, they're more likely, people that are in areas that are more likely to have damage are more likely to have the shutters or engineered shutters or opening protection. So, just something to remember that about when you're looking at charts is you have to understand, what they're looking at and how they got there. And this is a great example of it. But opening protection does work, obviously. And, it's one of those things that, it's important for wind mitigation. It's probably one of the most important items besides roof covering and keeping the water out. So, why do we protect openings? Well, this is why. These graphics right here show you that when you have a buildup of pressure in a house, you're likely to lose or structure. You're likely to lose the whole structure. So, when you breach an opening or an opening gets breached in a storm, it builds the pressure and it adds to the pressure on the outside of the house and increases the uplift. So this is why we protect openings. This is why it's important to keep winds out. So where is opening protection required? Well, again, we go to this map and the shaded areas show you where it's required. Also near coasts, so understanding that is very important to begin with. So again, these are the areas more likely to have hurricane damage, more likely to have shutters, hence the chart. So understanding that there's different types of protection, we call large missile 4.5, 9-pound missiles, small missile. We'll get into some of that, but generally you're going to need the documentation for the opening protection. But we also need, anything protected within a mile of the coast. As I mentioned earlier, other areas may require it, especially as they change the code, where you have exposures, maybe on a lake or along a highway, things like that, flat areas. So what do the testing mean? And, here's, this is from the Florida Building Code Residential, and this is kind of what the testing is. And you can go through that and look at, so if somebody said missile level C or B or D or E, you know what it means. But here's the ASTM guidelines as well. So what does that mean? When we come to our TAS 202, 203, and this is what we have here as far as the testing goes. Those are accepted statewide. So the testing comparison between the two test systems, these are the large missile impact tests they do. If you watch the news every year at the beginning of hurricane season, they shoot a 2x4 at the window, and this is what's allowed. So in the ASTM, we only do one test per, and then in the TAS, they do 2 tests per. This is the difference between the Miami-Dade or South Florida TAS test and the difference between the product approval and notice of acceptance. So here you have it here just to give you a visual of what that looks like and why. So we're looking for opening protection. We're looking to see what's the weakest form of windborne debris protection installed in the structure. So this includes all openings in the wall, including roofing, windows, doors, sliding glass doors, skylights, garage doors. Gable vents and other roof vents are not included. So just remember that venting is still allowed. We kind of touched on this earlier when we talk about soffits and things like that. Things that don't have to be protected technically, they can be considered an opening. but all openings, windows, doors, skylights must be in good condition. So buildings that have openings that need replacement do not qualify for wind mitigation rate differentials, regardless of the presence or absence of features. So we're going to get into that because this is where the form changes a little bit. And what we're talking about here is if this shutter is not usable in this condition, so this is not considered opening protection, okay? That is going to be an X, all right? So this window right here, again, is broken, destroyed, protected or not. This would be a Z. It's a broken window, right? This, again, here, this door is not going to do its job regardless of the opening protection. And the reason for this is water intrusion. And I know this is probably a side entry door or a back door or a pool bath door or something of that nature, but it's not going to prevent the water intrusion. So again, it would be a Z, right? Now, somebody asked about how much damage, is a cracked window or is that? Well, that's kind of left to the inspector to figure out if it's damaged enough. But if it's not going to work, then yes, it's a Z. So if the shutter's not going to work, it's an X. So the shutter has to be deployable and usable, and the opening has to be in good condition where it's reasonably expected that it would hold together. So cracked glass, probably not, probably going to be a Z in this case. So keep that in mind. This door is obviously weakened from wood decay, and there's no way it's going to hold together in any kind of wind pressure. So, all right, so we go on to the opening protection chart, and I bring this up, and it says mark an X in each column. I know there's companies out there who write numbers in, and I know the MySafe Florida Home uses numbers. The form says X. If you want to write a number in for each item, that's fine, but, the form does say X, just so you know, and I get why in certain instances it's really nice to know how many openings are protected, how many are not. But they didn't want to add that to the form, and I'm sure there's still some companies that are continuing to use those numbers even after the new form comes out. So, or is in use because it's out already. So, but the other thing here is we want to talk about the glazed is the blue. So those are glass openings. They have windows, garage doors with glass, skylights, glass block. We have the non-glazed openings is the far right column. We've now divided the N up, right? And we now have two different sections in the N, but they're both N. Appears to be A or B, but not verified. An opening protection that cannot be identified as A, B, or C. Meaning for some reason you can't identify it, and that would be that row. And of course, if it cannot be identified, but might be, you're going to mark the other row. Ultimately, the difference in the credits is probably going to be exactly the same, but it does give people an idea of what's going on there. So, and then of course we have no windborne debris protection, which is X, and then we have damaged openings, and that means the windows, the doors, that kind of stuff. It does not mean the shutters themselves. It means the window or the door is damaged, and that again is for water intrusion. So something they added new to the form. So we're going to use our letters A, B, C, N, X, or Z for glazed, and then our non-glazed openings are going to be the letter combinations underneath those letters, A1, A2, A3, B1, 2, 3, C1, 2, or 3, or N1, 2, or 3. So, and they're laid out on the form just like that. So just keep that in mind when you're filling this out. So glass block. What about glass block? Well, glass block comes in this interesting problem with many people, and they get very confused because it has to be protected according to this chart. But I'm going to point out here that, and this comes right from the building code, that a glass block is considered a masonry unit. It's right in the definition. But it has to be solid or hollow, and it has to be approved glass. So keep that in mind there. And then glass block has to meet test criteria and may require extra protection in the high velocity hurricane zone. So this happens a lot of times. People talk about South Florida, Miami-Dade, Broward County, high velocity hurricane zone. It has to have a protection. Okay, difference between that area and the other wind regions. Okay, this is glass block. Glass block installed with a mortar and a reinforcement metal. They're sold as bricks of glass, and that's exactly what we talk about. We talk about glass block. Now, when we talk about other types, there's pre-made plastic, acrylic. They are not glass block. They're plastic or acrylic. Sometimes they're installed, in this case here, with a silicone. Sometimes they're one piece. That is considered a window. So just keep that in mind. Just because it looks like glass block does not mean it's glass block. So here we are. So if we have glass, we're going to mark that down as the letters, and we have a solid opening, we're going to mark it down as the letter number combination. So we could have, an A1 where, everything's covered, or we can have it, the glass is covered, all the glass is covered, and an A3 where the non-glazed openings are not covered. So same thing with B, and then of course that goes also to C. It goes down to N, and then we have our X and our Z. One other little thing here is we have little check boxes by the plywood or OSB. If you have the wood structural panels, you're going to need to mark which ones that is there. Okay. I've never met anybody who could meet the wood structural panel table because it's rather difficult to follow for one, and there's limitations. So something like a slide glass door, stuff like that, it doesn't work because it's only allowed to be the size of plywood. So looking at glass, this is always great to know, and some of the South Florida guys are really great at looking at this stuff because they see a lot. But Miami-Dade County approved, usually on glass means it's impact, MDCA, laminated safety glass. A safety glass is not always impact glass, just understand that. And then looking at the thickness and looking at the ANSI numbers. So you can really learn a lot by doing this, and then you can find out by reading the label what the window or glass is. It doesn't tell you what the whole opening is, but the window or glass is. So I have said many times I found where they had impact glass in a non-impact door, and that is not uncommon. And just say there's retro companies out there. Entry Renovations is a company that will come in and cut your metal door and put you impact glass in there. Does not mean it's an impact opening. Okay, just keep that in mind. So one thing I love to point out this as well, as we all know, all glass is supposed to be labeled according to the building code. Reading those labels or seeing those labels or finding those labels, sometimes it's just not there. But overall, it's supposed to be labeled. So the other thing I point out here is these labels on the windows, and these come in a lot of times in the upper sash of the window or the upper track of the window, and they're not supposed to be removed. They're supposed to be there. So you get a lot of times people go in and they'll have their cleaners or they'll remove them all because they don't like the way they looked. They're supposed to be left behind, and this is one of the reasons. But if we read the label, you have the NOA, you can look it up. So that's very helpful to us. So when we're reading the glass, we also have other abbreviations, and these are some other abbreviations that you might find on glass, and very helpful, again, to help you understand what you're looking at, what you're looking for, and identifying them. Unfortunately, a lot of times you're going to need some other paperwork, but this does help you determine whether you really need to look further or somebody should be looking further. Maybe you may ask the homeowner to, find the permits or find the paperwork, that kind of stuff. Doing that ahead of time is very helpful, asking those questions. But here's some anatomy of glass, and this tells you some of the glass that we might use in a house. And understand that when you have a heat strengthened glass, that pane cannot be impact rated or tempered. They cannot be impact rated. You have to look at another pane, or it's not protected. So you can have a tempered glass on one side and a laminated, impact glass on the other side. But remember, what you see, something like a tempered, which is pretty common, that is not impact rated. So, people say, well, it's stronger. Yes, it is, but it doesn't mean it's impact rated. So, and just because it says safety glass or security glass, something like that does not necessarily, or even laminated, because you can have different thicknesses that are not impact rated. So here we are. Here's some, one design of windows. You can have, a lot of times they'll have an insulated glass with a glass on one side, sometimes on the outside now, and then a laminate on the inside. So you'd have to go in the building to understand if it's impact or not. But they also make single pane ones, meaning there's no air gap between them. And so they do make single pane impact glass. And they're generally not single pane, but they're one layer together, not that air gap or argon gap between them as an insulated glass. So just keep that in mind. So laminated glass generally is exactly that. It has different layers put together. So you can have, different strengths, different thicknesses, different things like that. So a lot of times if people say, hey, this is a laminated glass, it's got to be impact rated. Well, not necessarily. It could be a safety glass. It could be, we can use that in place of tempered glass in a door if we needed a tempered glass. So laminated insulated glass, again, mentioned this already. This is kind of what you'll see, and this is why people talk about the reflections, the number of reflections, because you're seeing each layer of product, glass, and lamination. So it's one way of helping to determine whether how much further you should dig. But this is an insulated one, and you'll see it basically 2 layers, one on the outside. Then we have this inside inner layer. Most of the time you'll see the laminated on the inside, and that's usually, the glass is usually there to protect the lamination from the sun. If you ever seen shutters, like a Lexan shutter that turned yellow because it sat out in the sun too much, this is why. It's to keep it clear. They can actually put products in there. It stops the UV. So it stops that from happening. But remember, not all safety glasses are laminated. Not all laminated glasses are approved for impact. And not all approved impact glasses are large missile. Tempered glass is a safety glass, not used for impact. Doesn't mean they wouldn't have another layer that's impact. Just want to point that out, because a lot of times people have asked questions about skylights specifically and doors and windows, like, well, if it says tempered, well, if it says tempered, it's not, but doesn't mean the other layer isn't. So be careful with that. The other thing to point out is there is installation instructions for shutters and opening protection, and you must use the proper connectors. So that's going to be up to the manufacturer how that's achieved and what that looks like. So, but most of the time you're not going to see just a direct removable Tapcon or turbo screw. You're gonna see something that is permanent. Now those screws may hold a track in or something like that. They're designed to be left into place. You can't put screws in and put screws out without doing some damage. If you're in concrete, a lot of times there'll be a lead anchor, and those screws, we call them sidewalk bolts, can be removed, loosened, and put back in. So, and usually the anchors will stay there. They do make a tool to set those anchors in there properly. So if you ever had to replace one, it can be done. You sometimes have to drill them out and then replace them, but it can be done. So the other thing is here, there are some older shutters out there that do not meet the requirements, and this is, we call these orange peel shutters. They make them in a couple different varieties, but they're usually generally lighter, thinner, and they're generally non-impact rated. I've yet to see an impact rated one with this orange peel texture. And there are one that looks like one of the modern shutters, but it's thinner and it has this orange peel on it. It's just non-impact rated. We also make these Lexan shutters, Lexan type, and some of them are impact rated, some are not. So one of the things you'll notice with this picture on the right is it's actually installed inside the window frame, and it's probably not impact rated. And if it was, it probably can't be installed like that. So again, you're going to need some documentation, you're going to need some stickers, and they are required to mark these permanently. Unfortunately, early on, a lot of the manufacturers put a sticker on there that wore off or used an ink that came off. So, you'd want the homeowner to hopefully maintain that documentation. And hopefully year after year they can use it again. Again, this is some South Florida shutter here on the left. It's very common, these Bohemian shutters. Some of these are impact rated, some are not. These clamshell ones on the left are probably not impact rated. They're older, they're thinner. The one on the right, the Bohemian shutters, you can actually, if you look closely, you'll see there's a grid behind it, like an expanded metal that's actually welded to the backside. Those probably are impact rated. So there's a difference. I mean, you have to know what you're looking at. And then you have some shutters like this that are really older, usually the 50s, 60s, 70s type stuff, not impact rated. They're not going to cover the whole opening. So no sense to go any further. So again, some of these comes from my buddy Manny, and we've taught many classes together, and this one came from him from South Florida, I believe. And this is a shutter that's attached to the door. The door manufacturer doesn't allow this, and the shutter manufacturer says it has to be connected to the opening or the structure, so not the opening. So you can't just add this to change your credits. So here's one that, again, South Florida picture. You have this one opening. If you're doing the My Safe Florida Home, a lot of times they'll count it as two for recording purposes, but this is one opening in the structure. And you have this older door and this glass. This needs to be protected, the whole opening. Unfortunately, what happened in the future was builders came up with something like this, where they put a wind-rated door in, solid, and then had to protect it because they were in the high-velocity hurricane, or the windborne debris zone outside the high-velocity hurricane zone, because inside the high-velocity hurricane zone, the whole opening has to be protected. Outside of the windborne debris zone, what would happen is they would shutter these side lights. And, again, you have to look at how they're installed, but this is typically done with approval of the building department and the plans. But one thing you'll notice here is it looks like the track is missing off the bottom. So they tiled it after the fact, so missing the track. But this is allowed in certain areas. So, again, I've had a house before, had 2 side lights, came with 2 shutters, 1 for each side light that were attached to the structure, but the main door was the exit. Point out here that at one point, the building code assumed when you shuttered a house, you would leave, and then they found that people didn't leave. So now it requires you have an exit, and not through the garage door, meaning the vehicle door. So a lot of times you'll see different modifications of shutters so you can get in or out. Some of those are certainly approved by the manufacturer, and those work. You can use like an accordion, you can use a hand crank roll down, something so they can get in and out of the house after a storm and the power's out. So, how many openings? Again, if you're in the My Safe Florida Home program, they're probably going to count this as 4, 1 for each side light, 1 for the door, 1 for the transom across the top, the arch window across the top. But we generally, filling out wind mitigation, call that 1 opening, just so you're aware. If you had, say, a wind-rated door, I might call it the full count each 1. But again, that's why the confusion comes in, because when you're doing grants, they're looking at sometimes just covering windows and maybe not the door. This is an older door, I could tell by the style. So really would recommend covering the whole opening. But could you get, if you attach shutters across over the glaze to the structure itself, get an opening protection? Yep, it happens every day. But really that opening framing and stuff needs to be wind rated as well. So on an older one, it may not be. So just keep that in mind. This one looks like it has shutters that go across the whole opening. So if you look carefully on the left picture, you actually see shutter bolts. Looking for stickers is always a fun game to play. And a lot of times you have to start looking them up, have to look up the manufacturers. Again, some of the guys in South Florida, they have a lot of mixed match stuff because they were required sooner than the rest of the state. And again, we moved our map. So a lot of times there's a lot newer homes in the other parts of the state. So they're usually a one and done system, where in South Florida, it might more of a hodgepodge mixture of stuff. So if you're in South Florida, you have to probably do a lot more research and a lot older stuff, which is harder to find. But when you don't know, you don't know. You're going to have to mark in. This is a house that I did the inspection on, and it was one of the first garage doors that I found that was glazed. The neighborhood required a glazed garage door. When they replaced it with an impact door. So this is a glazed and impact garage door. One thing you'll notice is the homeowner here had removed one of the braces off the back of the garage door, and it since has been replaced. It was sitting in the corner behind that garbage can, but they did that because they were worried about it hitting their car and when they opened their hatchback. So here somebody took probably plexiglass and attached it right to the window, and you'll see this later. I do another video on right wind mitigation, and this is not allowed. Does it provide some protection? I'm sure it does, but it's attached screwed, self-tapping screws right to the window frame. You've destroyed the window frame, and that window frame does not have won't handle the wind pressure, even if this was a proper Lexan type product. So, also like to point out, they do make window film that does have some impact results. So generally, I think this one was a small missile, but I've never seen anybody install it right on a residential. And generally, a lot of times we're using this on a taller building because they're required to put shutters 30 feet up, and they can do small missiles. So just understand that sometimes people will give you this documentation, and it's not always what it seems, and make sure you do the research. Again, here we have it right here. It says it right here, small missile. We looked it up, and whether it's installed right, it's very difficult. You have to look at the manufacturer's installation instructions. They're very specific on how this has to be done. So just so you know, they do make it. It can be used in areas, And again, it would be small missile. It's very rare do I see small missile stuff in my area, but depending upon when the building was built and the number of stories, you might find it quite common in 30 to 60 feet above ground. So anyway, again, in Florida, we do allow these wind pressure rated doors outside, if they're solid, outside the high velocity hurricane zone, as long as they're solid doors. But you got to make sure that they have the right approval for the right place. So Miami-Dade, you need Miami-Dade product approval there. So garage doors, again, can be very difficult. You can put shutters over them if you want, or you can replace them with impact doors if you want. There's different ways of doing that. So you need to make sure that all doors are permitted after 1994. So there should be permits available on it. And hard to find at times, but a lot of them are wind loaded. In South Florida, they should be impact. So solid doors. Signs of an impact door, really, if you look at them, you start to see they've changed and evolved over the last 10 years. But at one point, you used to be able to look at a door and knew right away it was probably impact. And the other thing I want to point out here is the vents at the bottom. Those are perfectly allowed. They do not need to be protected. Those are flood vents, and they need to be left intact. But not all doors look like impact doors anymore because they use either thicker metal or hidden channels. I'll show you that here. So you have one door on the left. Inside the roll of the metal, the stamping of the metal, there's a bar which adds to the strength of it. The one on the right doesn't have it. Doesn't mean it's not impact, and then one on the left doesn't mean it is. But the fact is that you have to look now. It's not as easy to see as it once was. So you need the documentation. One thing you will notice is that there's now hinges on each section, support section. There's more support sections. So the days of the cheap fiberglass garage doors are over. They was failed traumatically in Andrew, and they kind of gone away. The neighborhood I live in was built about that time, and they do not allow those at all in my neighborhood. So, but these are good signs that you have an impact door. You still have to look it up, still have to have proof. Again, some more good signs. You have these double rollers, double hinges, long pins, big braces, that kind of stuff. Good signs that we have an impact door. Again, you can look up manufacturers. Some manufacturers, garage door manufacturers, have been really great helping track this stuff down for us. So a lot of times you can just ask fellow inspectors. They'll tell you what door it is, and as long as you got the model number, they can look it up. Some of them, I know some buddies that are inspectors keep these files readily available because they come across the same door day after day. So again, look for labels. Sometimes they're not even on the track, but you can look for the model number and then look it up. You have to have a label. It has to be marked. This one, the only choice for this door was impact, so I guess it's fine. But you need to make sure you're looking at all this stuff and looking at all the braces. So now sometimes you'll run into things that are large and small, so you have to know which model they put in, how they did it. So just be careful when you're looking at this. You have to make sure you're reading the whole thing and this NOA, and make sure you have the right model and the right components. Sometimes you have to look at the plans. Sometimes you have to see what it says on those. And a lot of times on the newer homes, these will be right in a plastic bag stuck in the back of the door. So I think it's where we downloaded this one, but it's where I get them a lot of times. In my area, they've gotten really good about adding stickers and marking them. So we write them up on a home inspection. If it's not marked, we tell them to get it marked, especially if it's new. But again, you can look them up and you can find out if they're impact rated just by you can look at the drawings, you can look at the models. And again, you can call most of the manufacturers. They're pretty diligent about getting back to you these days. So sometimes they'll say here it's approved, and then it'll say not required to have hurricane protection. Again, this is a South Florida thing, and it alludes to the fact that it's impact rated, so you want to be careful and make sure you're reading things. Don't be afraid to highlight them. The entire opening has to be protected. You can't do this to say, oh, I added a glass to my impact door and now it's not impact. Well, you can't just cover it with a shutter. First of all, that shutter is not installed right, and remember the whole opening has to be protected. So what about hurricane fabric? Great products. I love it. This is AstroGuard. There's a few of them out there. And just want to make sure that you're reading the documentation. You'll notice this one also says large and small missiles, so you need to know what they did. And then you need to make sure it's installed properly. Some of these manufacturers require them to be a space behind them or put on an angle. If you look at the bottom right, there's an angle behind them. Sometimes there's a bar in the middle of them to prevent anything that hits the fabric from breaking the window. What about garage doors? It was converted. Now we're unable to identify the door now because it was converted. And I have a simple rule for this. This is still a garage door until I can prove it's not. And it's still open until I can prove it's not. But what I would tell you is if you had a permit to enclose this garage and it was inspected and signed off by the city, I would now consider that no longer an opening because I would assume they framed behind it properly and they secured the door properly and they had probably some plans and everything else this city or county signed off on. So I'd be good with this not calling it an opening if I had all the other documentation. Otherwise, it's unknown, right? What's the difference between the Miami-Dade and FPC shutters? Miami-Dade is a higher impact. In general items, Miami-Dade doesn't allow any breakage or penetration. FPC allows breakage with limited penetration. So, again, when you're reading these shutter labels, make sure, just because it says large missile, but this one actually says Texas. So there are shutters out there that meet other state requirements, so you want to make sure they meet the Florida requirements, not just Texas to Louisiana, two I've seen before. Here you go. That's what it should look like. And you got your numbers, your ASTM right there, and you got large missile. Again, this is a Lexan type material. Works great. And then here you go. This says impact resistant. You have to look it up and see what it was, but willing to bet if this is a house, it's probably large missile, but you'd have to look it up. This is not enough. Somebody showed me from North Florida the other day where they were getting impact windows in. They were small missile, but the mullions they sent were not designed for impacts. So interesting enough, the whole opening has to be protected, and that mullion wasn't designed for it. They were using a non-impact mullion. Sounds simple enough, but it's how it's attached, which is going to hold the windows together and keep the whole system working. So here's a typical garage door. We've all seen these with a little dot. The installer is supposed to mark which one it is because there are options. So you got to make sure that when they do that, they mark the right one so you know which one it is. So there's many shutter types available, opening protection available. We have panels, metal or plastic or Lexan types. We have accordion shutters. We have Bahamas roll up, roll down. We have fabric. And they're always coming out with new stuff, so it's great. One thing I'll point out here is ply locks. People use ply locks, especially on brick homes. They may work very well if they're done right, but they are not approved at all. So what about plywood? Well, you can use it, but it has to meet the building code requirements and covers the entire opening, and it overlaps it. And of course, you want about if you're going into masonry, you want about 4 inches off the opening. If not, when you want about 3 inches into the framing. So, but there is a chart, and if somebody installs them, and in my mind, if they had the building official got them to sign off on it, I'd probably give them the credit, but I'd want to see the building official signing off on it, making sure it met the building code. These are installed incorrectly. You cannot do this. This is not to the structure. It's to the window itself. Not acceptable. This, you could buy these at Lowe's and Home Depot. They do make these in impact and non-impact. They're like a corrugated plastic. They make them a more clear version as well. These obviously have been left up for a while, but the fasteners are not correct. Yes, you can use fasteners. They tell you have to install a fastener with a wing nut and a washer. So the fasteners stay in place, and then these things have to be labeled, and they have to be appropriate size, but you also have the appropriate number of fasteners. So this is definitely not appropriate number of fasteners. Again, beware of the bogus insulation. This is not allowed. People do this so they have that exit they need out of their house. Again, does it offer some protection? Yes, but this is not going to give them any kinds of credit, and this is going to be just a glazed opening at this point. So we take all these pictures, and this is just a bunch of pictures I take when I do a wind mitigation. This had impact windows and impact shutters for the openings, and so we go around, we take a bunch of them. You need one for each type of opening. So I need one for that arched window, one for the side light, one for the door, unless it came as a package unit, which a lot of times they do. And then I want stickers. I'm trying to get labels. Again, if you're trying to get label window etchings, Using a black or a dark purple Post-it note on one side, then taking a picture is very helpful. And if you have any practice with a flashlight or a flash, sometimes you can get it pretty good. So just so you know. But here we are, and then we document the shutters. We're going to show you all the shutters for the house. That's the opening they go to, and then we're going to show you the label on the shutter itself. A lot of times if you rub the shutters with some dirty fingers or some shoe polish, those letters will show up much better. But given the fact this was an FBC house built after the shutter requirements, it was pretty simple to document it. No big deal. You also notice the garage door there looks to be might be insulated. Sometimes that covers up your labels, and there's nothing you can do. Ask the homeowner to remove them, but you don't know where the label's going to be. So you might have to look at plans, you may have to look at permitting, or you may have to call the installer. So again, here's our labels, and they should be adhered to the door. And this company does a hole punch so nobody can cheat it. And there you go. This is impact door, and you can look it up and find out what the impact rating is. Sliding glass doors, again, these on the bottom left here have shutters over them. You can see the anchor bolts, and when you include all these pictures, this is all the same house. These are all in my report. So, and then we try to get these window stickers, which are sometimes very difficult to do on an occupied home, but we try to get one of each type of window so we know. But we check every window, and I'll show you here in a few minutes why we do that. But here you go, just some pictures. This here, I bring it up because I've only run into this on a residential house one time. This was originally shown in one of the flash programs on a commercial building. This is a screen. It's a perforated metal, and this is actually impact resistant. This guy owned a business. He put shutters on it, and then he wound up asking the guys to go do his back patio so you didn't have to worry about it. Pretty good idea. It's starting to rust there in the bottom right, so time to take care of that. Skylights. Always the bane of most people's existence, but what you want to do is hopefully you can see the sticker. You ask for any paperwork. You look at the roof permit. If it's been replaced, that's very helpful, but you're going to need some documentation. I'll play this video for you and listen carefully to how I tap on these, and this tells me whether the impact or not. Now, you need to do this on both sides, but this was interesting enough. It was a 4-year-old house, and I was just tapping on it. I was talking to the realtors who were sitting in the living room here, and the one realtor looked at me. She noticed the difference right away and knew something was wrong. So what you notice is those first 3 panes in that, or sections of slider, were non-impact. That last one was, and the one around the corner was all impact. We contacted the builder. The builder was a 4-year-old house, said, nope, warranty's up, can't do anything for you. The realtors actually called the installer. He came out and said, yep, you're right. It was an option to do this impact or non-impact, and somehow they got the wrong panels. They don't know if it was a manufacturer sent the wrong ones. They mixed them up in the warehouse. They're not sure how that happened, but they ordered the right ones and were able to make it right. So this is a 4-year-old house, and these people didn't realize they didn't have impact sliders. So tool list, what do we use for tools? Again, we need the form, we need a ladder, we need a flashlight. Folding rule or measuring wheel, very great for measuring different things. Obviously the shape, the house itself. I go to measuring wheel when it's close because you want to have that documentation. And then I use the folding rule for nail length and nail spacing. I do use aerials quite a bit for measuring the roof shape, and that works great if it's, obviously it helps you get going in the right direction, but some of the websites don't have it. You can order it online. There's different roofing estimating companies that'll give it to you. It's rather expensive, but my property appraiser does offer measuring, and then you can tell pretty quickly if it's obviously not within 5 or 10 feet. I'm just going to use that, but if it's close, I'm going to measure it. Pitch gauge. We're going to use this pitch gauge now. You should have seen this already. We're going to use this. You can use the actual pitch gauge. You can use a different brand, or you can use an app. The app works pretty well. Unless it's close, I would go to the pitch gauge. Just be careful when you take pictures of the pitch gauge. Watch for your flash and angle, because your angle could change what the gauge reads unless you're using a digital one, of course. If you're using a digital one, make sure it's calibrated. Measuring gauge for roof sheathing, a little ruler, that's great. The Zircon MT6 is really the only one I would use. Bosch makes one that would probably work. The Zircon M40 works most of the time except for metal roofs. So a camera and phone, extendable pole. Now we're going to probably want to start reading, etchings on roof-to-wall connections at times, unless we have other documentation. So that is very helpful. And then Sharpie marker, obviously, for marking our nail spacing. And, other things you might want is a spectrometer, binoculars, dust mask. Don't forget to wear your climate through insulation, wear a dust mask, okay? Just do it. Your sinuses will thank you for it, and your lungs will thank you for it. I know it's hot. I know it's terrible, but you really should just have one even while you're climbing through that attic. So, and I'm going to write this report and send and share this, but this is how we do how I take and do my wind mitigation. And I'll do that in another video, and I'll show you that, and you'll be able to see exactly how I kind of put together a report in this simple home, and then you'll be like, oh, yeah, and give you the confidence to be able to go out and do it. But we'll start that on another video.